Hey guys, tonight we begin our journey in a place you've likely never dreamed of falling asleep, the medieval leech ward. The air is musty, thick with the scent of damp straw, sweat, and something faintly metallic. That's probably the blood. Rows of low wooden cots stretch across the stone chamber, each occupied by a groaning soul wrapped in linen and herbal poultices. Candlelight flickers along the soot-stained walls, casting shadows that look a little too leech-shaped for comfort. This is where you'd come for healing in the 14th century. Not to rest, really, but to be drained, literally. Welcome to the barber surgeon's domain, where the scissors are sharp, the basin is ready, and the cure for just about anything involves removing something red from your body. You've barely stepped in before someone's asking to see your tongue, feel your pulse, and slice a vein in your arm, all in the name of balancing your humors. You lie back, head spinning slightly, not just from illness but also from the 4 ounces of blood you just lost. The barber surgeon hums a little folk tune as he cleans his tools with what smells suspiciously like vinegar and onion water. He's wearing a smock stained with, well, you don't want to know. You've heard he also cuts hair, extracts teeth, and amputates limbs when necessary. What a multi-talented fellow! Next to you, a boy of about 10 is having a leech applied behind his ear for headaches. It's about humoral balance, the surgeon explains cheerily. Too much black bile, clearly. You glance at the slimy creature wriggling on the boy's skin, and wonder who was brave enough to discover that leeches had this particular talent. Fun fact: leeches were farmed in shallow ponds and sold in bulk at market. Apothecaries even kept them in jars behind the counter like wriggling licorice sticks. One chronicle mentions that a bishop kept his personal set in a silver dish, perhaps to impress guests. Yes, medical luxury had its quirks. Historians still argue whether bloodletting ever really helped anyone, or if it simply gave the illusion of progress while the body either recovered or didn't. But for centuries, bleeding was the go-to fix for everything from a sore throat to melancholy. You've got phlegm? Cut the arm. A little too much anger? Slice the leg. Feeling faint? Maybe that means you need more bleeding, not less. By now, you're reclining on your cot, the wound wrapped in cloth soaked with rosewater and honey, a surprisingly sweet combo if you ignore the sting. The herbalist shuffles by, tossing mint and sage into the smoky brazier at the room's center. The smell does help, masking the otherwise nose-curdling bouquet of open wounds and used bandages. You're offered a drink to aid your humors, warm wine infused with rosemary, pepper, and a few mysterious seeds. It's better than water, which often comes with its own collection of illnesses. You sip cautiously, hoping that your barber surgeon doesn't return with his saw next. In the corner, a monk is scribbling notes into a thick book, carefully observing your treatment. It might seem archaic, but this was the age of meticulous records. How else would they remember that 3 leeches was good for headaches, but 5 might induce fainting? Suddenly, the surgeon lifts a jug and sniffs it. "Ah," he murmurs, "the urine flask." He holds it up to the light, swirling the contents thoughtfully. You might want to look away. This is what passes for diagnosis. And yes, we'll get to that golden world of pee in a bit. But first, you're left to rest. Your wound is wrapped, the leech has dropped off, content bloated, and now lounging in its jar like it owns the place. The boy beside you is chewing fennel seeds to ease his nausea. Outside, the bells of the abbey toll softly, echoing down the corridor like a slow heartbeat. You close your eyes for a moment, the smell of lavender and leech slime oddly soothing. You've survived the first round. Barely. But don't get too cozy. The real cures, the weird ones, are just getting started. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I always love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because you're going to need all the calm you can get before someone prescribes you warm chicken droppings for the plague. You don't remember falling asleep, but now you're stirring, still in the same infirmary, only this time there's a new scent in the air. Something foul. Something poultry adjacent. You crack open an eye just in time to see a matronly healer shuffling by with a cloth-wrapped bundle, its corners darkened with something suspiciously sticky. She heads toward a patient in the far cot, someone with buboes swelling beneath his arms, gasping softly in fever. This, you quickly realize, is plague country. Welcome to the worst pandemic Europe has ever known, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, it wiped out nearly half the continent's population. And when science runs out, superstition steps in. You sit up slowly, eyeing the bundle as the healer unwraps it. Inside, a freshly plucked chicken, or at least part of one. She presses its warm, feathery backside gently, almost lovingly, against the poor man's swollen lump. Yes, you're watching a bubonic cure in action, the famous chicken bottom poultice. The logic went something like this. Illness is caused by bad humors or poisonous vapors inside the body. Chickens, being warm and alive, could supposedly draw that poison out, especially through their, nether regions. So instead of medicine, they applied poultry. Directly. But that wasn't even the strangest part. The chicken had to be alive when applied. As it slowly weakened, so too, it was believed, did the illness. Once the chicken gave up the ghost, they'd toss it and, if you were lucky, fetch another. Repeat as necessary. You, meanwhile, are offered something far more fragrant. A leather pouch filled with aromatic herbs, dung ash, and dried flowers. To ward off the bad air, says the healer. You hold it near your face, trying not to breathe through your mouth. Bad air, known as miasma, was the popular explanation for sickness. People believed that foul smells literally carried disease, so anything that masked odors might protect you. Some physicians took this idea to, let's say, aromatic extremes. One 14th-century remedy called for placing feces, specifically human feces, into a brass bowl, heating it over coals, and inhaling the steam. It was thought the strength of the vapor would counteract the poison of the plague. Imagine the smell of a busy privy, magnified by fire. Now imagine doing that while ill. Historians still argue whether these foul-smelling cures were sincere medical attempts or desperate psychological comforts. Was it about healing the body, or scaring off death with sheer stink? After all, during a plague, desperation makes strange remedies seem reasonable. Outside, the bells toll again, another soul gone. You peer through the slatted shutters and spot a line of carts piled with the recently deceased. The air is heavy with ash from the burning of tainted clothing. It's grim, but there's a surreal calm to it all. People adapt, even to disaster. In town, the physicians walk about in long robes and beaked masks stuffed with herbs, cloves, lavender, mint. The beak wasn't for show. It was their personal air filter. You'd think they looked terrifying, but really, they were the closest thing to hazmat suits medieval Europe had. Some even poked their patients with sticks from a distance, avoiding touch entirely. Bedside manner wasn't exactly their strength. A boy in the ward starts coughing, and the barber surgeon tenses. You watch as he examines the child's fingernails, checks the tongue, and sniffs a little cloth the boy had been sweating into. Then comes a quiet nod. "Wormwood," he mutters, "and chicken broth. Maybe a pigeon's liver, if we have one." You lie back, trying to ignore the smell of smouldering dung from the far corner. Earlier, Someone claimed that burning animal waste in your home could cleanse the air. One woman even insisted on placing dried cow dung beneath a child's pillow to absorb sickness overnight. Fringe science? Maybe. But in an age when physicians debated whether sneezing was a symptom or a cause of plague, nothing was off limits. A soft breeze flutters the corner of your blanket, carrying with it a mixture of lavender and burnt hair. Someone must be trying that scorched goat method again. It involves burning goat fur to smoke out demons, or at least purify the room. You wonder whether it ever worked, or just made everyone leave. The room quiets again. Someone is praying softly in Latin. Another patient clutches a small wooden cross, kissing it rhythmically. When science failed, many turned to faith. Saints like Sebastian and Roch were called upon to protect plague victims. Pilgrims carried amulets, wore charms, or made offerings, anything to tilt the odds. And sometimes they'd simply run, abandoning towns, families, even cities. Whole villages vanished overnight. But you're still here, swaddled in linens, pouch of fragrant filth clutched near your face like a floral security blanket. You've survived another hour in the medieval infirmary. Congratulations. Just don't cough. The next morning, if it is morning, since the ward stays in perpetual twilight, you're handed a warm flask. It's corked, but you can feel the liquid sloshing inside. Standard protocol, the monthly assistant says, motioning for you to hand it over once it's full. You take the hint. Welcome to the golden world of uroscopy. In the Middle Ages, your pee was more than just waste. It was a personal diagnostic map, a reflection of your innermost balance. Physicians would swirl it, smell it, and yes, occasionally taste it to discern what ailed you. Don't worry. Most preferred to simply gaze at it thoughtfully like a fine wine. There was even a tool called the matula, a clear, bulbous flask with a narrow neck, ideal for observing the precious golden stream. The color, cloudiness, bubbles, sediment, smell, every detail held meaning. If your urine was pale and clear, perhaps you were suffering from a cold stomach. If it was murky with bits floating in it, maybe your liver was staging a protest. Too red. You might be on fire inside. Figuratively, one hopes. One physician in Paris claimed he could diagnose over 20 diseases by urine alone. And by diagnose, he mostly meant staring into the flask until inspiration struck. It wasn't a fool's game, though. Within the strange rituals, there were kernels of empirical insight. Today, we know that urine does reveal dehydration, infection, even diabetes. But in 1325, doctors interpreted cloudy yellow as divine poetry, not pathology. You lie back again, only slightly disturbed. The assistant returns with your sample, now cradled reverently like a relic. A physician appears, a university-trained man, robed in dark wool, with a beard that suggests wisdom or at least stubbornness. He holds the flask up to the candlelight. "Ah," he says slowly, "second degree of yellow, slight sediment, midday collection, male patient, likely imbalance in the choleric humor." You blink. "Choleric," he explains with a patient smile, "hot and dry. You might be prone to anger, indigestion, and ambition. Very dangerous combination." He uncorks a leather-bound volume and flips to a full-page illustration. The urine wheel. It's a literal color wheel, but all the shades are, well, shades of pee. Every hue, from white to almost crimson, is matched to a diagnosis. He traces his finger around it and taps on rusty gold. Here. Classic. Historians still debate how much physicians actually believed in this system, or whether it was more about performance. After all, swirling a flask while muttering wise-sounding Latin created the appearance of expertise. even if the conclusions were a little yellow-tinted. In some households, wealthy patients would even send their urine ahead by courier. Imagine that, your flask traveling by horse-cart, jostling down muddy roads toward a physician who's never even seen you, but will write back a full diagnosis after sniffing your sample. Kind of like medieval telehealth, minus the webcam and plus the odor. And lest you think this was reserved for commoners, think again. Royalty, too, had their urine analyzed, often with alarming frequency. King Charles II reportedly consulted multiple physicians on the hue of his morning offering. Some nobles even kept color charts on hand, just in case a diagnosis was needed during dinner. You watch now as the physician adds a tiny sprig of mint to the flask and sets it aside. "For balance," he says mysteriously. Then he prescribes you a warm bath in elderflower and a fasting period of 1 day. You're unsure how that's connected to your urine, but gnawed anyway. Back in your cot, the conversation around you hums with bodily speculation. "Mine was dark as ale," a man near the fire boasts. "Doctor said I was too lustful." "Mine had bubbles," whispers a woman nearby. "They gave me pickled plum and mustard seed. Worked like magic." One patient seems unconvinced. "Mine was red," he mutters, "but only after I drank all that beetroot beer." That must count for something, right? It does not. According to medieval logic, you are what your urine tells you. No excuses. The physician returns with a scroll and presents it like sacred text. It's your treatment plan. You'll need to balance your humors with a mixture of warm goat's milk, mulberry jam, and occasionally chewing dried rose petals. And, he adds gently, try to avoid excessive thinking. Too much thought heats the brain, which may overcook your yellow bile. You close your eyes again, flask of elderflower bathwater steaming faintly nearby. It's oddly soothing. Outside, a bell tolls for vespers. The shadows lengthen. You begin to wonder if maybe the body is full of mysterious fluids whose moods determine your fate. It certainly feels plausible after the third time someone examines your pee like it's the Mona Lisa. And just before you drift off, you hear a new patient grumble. "Do I really have to pee in front of the monk again?" Yes. Yes, you do. You awaken to quiet murmurs and a strong waft of clove and thyme. A woman has just entered the ward, wrapped in layers of linen and wool, her head covered with a modest wimple. She's not sick. She's a wise woman, a traveling healer, and tonight she's tending to a patient suffering from what medieval physicians simply called a wandering womb. Yes, you heard that right. According to long-held medical theory, the womb was not anchored in place. It could move, and when it wandered, upward toward the chest or into the throat, it caused hysteria, choking, or even madness. Think of it like internal GPS gone wrong. You scoot over a bit on your cot, curious but wary. The woman lights a bundle of dried herbs and begins wafting the smoke around the patient's waist. Sage, myrrh, and crushed dung beetle shell, an unusual combination, but purposeful. She fans it carefully, all while muttering in soft Latin. The goal: entice the womb back to its rightful place using scent, warmth, and a touch of fear. If you're wondering what could frighten a womb, let's just say the list includes sulfur, dung ash, and extremely strong perfumes. You squint as she brings out a new tool, a small cloth bag soaked in vinegar and stuffed with dried goat dung, rosemary, and powdered frankincense. She gently tucks it beneath the patient's knees. The scent, surprisingly, is not unpleasant, smoky, earthy, and sharp. Another cloth, soaked in rose oil, is placed beneath the patient's nose to anchor the soul and keep the womb from fleeing upward. Historians still argue whether these methods had any physiological benefit or if they were symbolic gestures meant to offer the illusion of control. But for many women in medieval Europe, These treatments were preferable to what university-trained male physicians offered: bleeding, blistering, or simply writing it off as divine punishment. The wandering womb was just one chapter in the larger tale of medieval female medicine. Women were often treated separately, medically, morally, and socially. Childbirth was one of the few arenas where women ruled. Midwives were deeply respected, though often feared for their knowledge. They carried sacred herbs, special amulets, and yes, recipes involving fermented urine and dried feces. You blink. Yes, that's what the woman is unpacking now. She pulls out a parchment scroll from a leather pouch and reads softly. For difficult birth, mix deer dung with honey and fennel, place under the tongue of the laboring mother. You look around the room. No one seems shocked. She turns toward you suddenly. "Restless dreams?" she asks, eyeing your blanket. You nod, partly to humor her. She offers a sachet of dried chamomile mixed with mouse droppings, crushed mint, and a scrap of parchment inscribed with a tiny prayer. "Place it under your pillow," she says with a wink. "The mice help scare away bad spirits." You accept it. What else can you do? In another cot, a young woman clutches her stomach. The wise woman examines her gently, whispering soothing phrases. A quick check of the tongue, a few pinches of the skin, and a long, loud sniff. "Heat in the liver," she says, reaching for a bottle. She needs cooling. The bottle contains a thin brown paste, figs, powdered toadstool, and a pinch of dried sheep dung, applied directly to the abdomen. Twice a day until she stops vomiting stars. You stare at the ceiling. Maybe you heard that wrong. Vomiting stars? By the hearth, a small group of women gather, watching the healer work. They nod, some whispering prayers, others offering suggestions from their own homes. Crushed eggshells for fertility, horse dung poultices for sore feet, or a spoonful of stale urine mixed with wine for stubborn coughs. The healer listens, absorbs, then nods graciously. In this world, knowledge is collective, passed from hand to hand. You shift on your cot, catching sight of an old herbal tucked beneath the healer's bag. Its pages are smudged with ink, ash, and fingerprints. You glimpse a drawing of the female body, elegant, curved, labeled in Latin and guesswork. The womb is drawn like a sleeping animal, curled and mysterious, with arrows pointing in every direction. One recipe on the open page catches your eye. For hysterical trembling, take owl dung dried in moonlight, mix with mother's milk, and apply behind the ears. That one probably hasn't made it to modern pharmacology, but you can't help but admire the creativity. You're not sure if the wise woman is healer, priestess, or alchemist, but she works with confidence, and the room feels calmer. She hands a new mother a talisman woven from hair and goose bones. "For strength," she says, and just before the woman leaves, she turns back and sprinkles a bit of salt at the door. "To keep the womb from wandering again." You smile, groggy and still holding your sachet of herbs and mouse droppings. If nothing else, tonight's lesson is clear. In medieval medicine, your body was a battlefield, and your womb a traveler in need of guidance. The smell hits you first. It's hard to describe. A pungent cocktail of aged sweat, blood, and the faintest note of boiled onions. You blink groggily and realize you've been moved. No longer in the ward. You're now in a narrow tent set up near the edge of a battlefield. Outside, the thud of distant footsteps and the creak of leather armor reminds you, this is where medicine and war collide. You're in the hands of the field surgeons now, where pain relief is a prayer, and sterility is a myth. A soldier is laid out on the wooden table beside you. His leg, wrapped in linen, is dark with dried blood and something less identifiable. A surgeon with a thick apron, more stains than fabric, leans in to inspect the wound. "Good pus," he mutters, poking gently. "Means the body is fighting." You raise an eyebrow. Good pus. Indeed. In medieval medicine, pus was often interpreted as a positive sign, the body purging evil humours or corrupted blood. The more white and creamy, the better. Greenish. Worrisome. Black. Start digging the grave. This theory, called laudable pus, was so widely believed that surgeons were sometimes suspicious if wounds healed too cleanly. The tools are laid out with pride: a bone saw, a curved hook, tweezers forged in iron, and several lengths of linen soaked in wine. There's no anesthesia, just a wooden stick to bite, and maybe a prayer to Saint Apollonia, patron of pain. The surgeon pours wine over the wound, both to clean and distract, and begins cutting. You try not to watch. But here's where things get even more curious. Not every surgery was a full-on amputation. For deep cuts and infected wounds, some medieval surgeons invited maggots. Yes, they'd let them feast on the dead flesh. Nature's little surgeons, they might have said, though more likely in Latin. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or just a regional quirk. Some records from 13th century France describe wound care involving clean white worms that consumed the rot. And today, ironically, sterile maggot therapy is a recognized practice in modern medicine. So maybe the medievals got one thing right. Accidentally. You shift in your seat as the surgeon finishes his work. He wraps the leg with strips soaked in a concoction of honey, goose fat, and dried cow dung. To draw out infection, he says with a nod. Honey, at least, we know has antibacterial properties. The rest, well, questionable. A younger assistant begins boiling needles over an open flame. They're preparing to suture another patient's shoulder. The thread. Horsehair, boiled and oiled. Sturdy, the assistant says, proudly. You believe him. It's just the pain that concerns you. On a nearby table, a man with a facial wound has been treated with a mask of mashed beans, garlic, and crushed snail shells. To cool the fever and soften the skin, murmurs the herbalist. A strange combination, but apparently popular in Italy and parts of the Iberian Peninsula. There's even a drawing in one manuscript of a knight covered in what looks like hummus, resting peacefully under a canopy of herbs. Across the tent, a woman tends to soldiers with minor scrapes. She's preparing a thick salve made from ox bile, lard, and powdered rosemary. You're not sure what the bile does, but the rosemary smells nice. It's slathered onto everything, from arrow wounds to blistered feet. Keeps the spirits in, she says, tapping a patient's forehead gently. You wander further and see a row of jars, each labelled with scribbles. One contains crushed emerald, another burnt wool. A third appears to be filled with dried rabbit pellets. You look away. Sometimes it's best not to ask. A grizzled archer stumbles in, bleeding from a nicked ear. Hot iron, the surgeon barks. Seal it. You flinch as they bring out a glowing poker. The man doesn't. He simply bites down on a cloth and nods. A moment later, the smell of burnt flesh hits the air. It's sharp, almost sweet. You're told it closes the gate to spirits of infection. The pain, irrelevant. The wound, sealed. You can't help but admire the grim efficiency. Later, at dusk, the battlefield quiets. The wounded snore or moan softly. You sit beside a bucket filled with bloodied cloths and ash. A fire crackles in the corner. Someone is boiling bandages in wine again. Better than water, they say. And in the fading light, the surgeon shares one last story. Had a man once, he says, sipping from a jug, took a blade through the belly, gave him warm ale, stitched him with catgut, and told him to stop dying. He chuckles. Didn't listen. But it was worth a try. You gnawed slowly, feeling the weight of the day settle into your bones. In a world where war was common and medicine scarce, you realized survival was often more about stubbornness than science. You're back in the village now, thankfully far from battlefield tents and cauterizing irons, but rest isn't exactly guaranteed. You're curled up by a modest hearth, warm linen tucked around your shoulders, when a sharp, throbbing pain pulses behind your left molar. Medieval dentistry, it turns out, is not a field you want to explore. But here we are. The healer arrives just after dawn, a small satchel clinking softly at her side. She smells faintly of vinegar, cloves, and toasted bread. You sit upright, eyes wide, as she unrolls her tools. A pair of wooden pliers, a tin of crushed herbs, and something that looks alarmingly like a roasted mouse on a skewer. "You've got a devil in your tooth," she explains gently, poking the side of your cheek. "But don't worry, we'll smoke it out." Toothaches in the Middle Ages were not just physical, they were spiritual. Some believed tiny demons lived inside your gums, gnawing at the roots, whispering through your molars. Others simply blamed cold humors, bad air, or, of course, your sins. Regardless of the cause, the cures were imaginative. She starts by rubbing a paste onto your jaw. It's warm and gritty, ground mustard seed, vinegar, and stale urine. "Warms the bone," she says. You're skeptical, but the heat distracts you from the pain. Next comes the roasted mouse. She presses it gently against your swollen cheek, murmuring something about mouse strength. According to folk remedy books from 11th century Saxony, roasted rodents were believed to draw out inflammation. Historians still debate whether this was symbolic, sympathetic magic, or just desperate guessing. Some prefer worms, she offers, almost apologetically, crushed and mixed with elderflower, or crushed beetles, if it's a molar. You decline politely. She sets aside the mouse and picks up a tincture, a brownish liquid made from nettle root, sage, and fermented goat's milk. A few drops under your tongue are supposed to ease the pain. It tastes like pickled socks, but you do feel slightly less inclined to scream. At the village chapel, another treatment is taking place. A priest has tied a string around a young man's aching tooth and is leading him in 3 circles around the altar. "To confuse the devil," someone whispers. "If he doesn't know where he is, he'll let go." The man's eyes are wide, but he follows faithfully. Meanwhile, down the lane, an old woman swears by a different method, urinating on a red-hot coal and inhaling the steam through her mouth. "Burns the bad humors," she insists, waving away the acrid smoke. You sincerely hope she's wrong. Some towns even had a tooth-puller, usually a traveling charlatan with a cart, a crooked smile, and a shiny pair of forceps. For a small fee, they'd yank your tooth while playing a fiddle or telling jokes. Distraction as anesthesia. You wonder if any of them were actually good at it. You sip warm wine, swishing it as instructed. Fermented drinks were often used in place of antiseptic, alcohol to kill bacteria, if only slightly. A neighbor suggests you chew a clove, an idea that feels oddly familiar. This one, at least, seems to help. Score 1 for the medievals. The healer rewraps your jaw with a cloth soaked in mulled wine and rosemary. "Keep it warm," she advises, "and avoid salted fish." Why? It invites spirits to chew. Of course. Historians still argue whether these remedies were grounded in observation or sheer folklore. After all, some herbal treatments, like cloves and sage, do contain compounds that numb pain or reduce inflammation. But when paired with dead mice and ritual walks, it's hard to know where science ends and story begins. You lie back again, cheek wrapped like a sleepy mummy. The pain hasn't vanished, but it's dulled. Outside, The wind carries the scent of early bread baking and someone boiling onions for soup. You breathe deeply. In the next room, someone sneezes loudly. Tooth devil leaving the body, the healer says cheerfully. She's not joking. You drift into a half-dream, imagining your toothache as a tiny goblin retreating under your tongue, grumbling about roasted rodents and overcooked urine. Strange, yes, but oddly comforting. And as sleep finally tugs at you, the healer tucks a sprig of yarrow behind your ear. For dreams without jaw pain, she whispers. You smile. Just a little. You're jolted awake by heat, not painful, but dense and humid, as if someone has turned the entire room into a steaming bathhouse. You sit up, blanket clinging to your skin, and realize someone's dragged you into what can only be described as a sweat chamber. Medieval people loved to sweat. Not for relaxation. This was medicinal. Your head spins slightly from the rising vapors of thyme, sage, and something else that smells suspiciously like boiled frogs. Welcome to the world of fever cures, where sweating, stewing, and swaddling are just the beginning. A healer leans over and pats your arm. Fever's trying to leave, she says gently. Let's help it find the door. She pours another ladle of scented water onto the hot stones at your feet. Steam rises immediately, curling through the air like an invisible serpent. For those suffering fevers, the goal was to purge heat from within. Patients were often wrapped tightly in blankets, placed near fires, or confined in these sweat dens until they glistened like roasted hens. The logic was rooted in humoral theory. Too much yellow bile, hot and dry, needed to be balanced. Hence, hot rooms, strange brews, and frogs. The frog part isn't a joke. In parts of medieval Europe, healers used live frogs split open and placed directly on the forehead or chest of feverish patients. To draw the heat, they said. In some cases, the frogs were boiled first and mashed into a paste with barley and powdered wormwood. The end result? A very unfortunate poultice. Historians still argue whether such amphibious interventions were based on old Roman practices or just good old medieval improvisation. There's no clear link, but frogs appear in dozens of herbal texts as fever treatments, especially in regions where real medicine was hard to come by and pond access was, well, plentiful. You're handed a bowl of broth, lukewarm water, garlic, nettle, and wild onion. It's bitter, but oddly refreshing. It helps keep the body open, the healer explains. You're starting to wonder if open just means sweaty. In the corner of the room, another patient is wrapped in damp cloths soaked in rose vinegar. Every so often, a helper removes the cloths, wrings them out, and reapplies them with surprising precision. We're drowning the fever slowly, she says, almost cheerfully. You shiver slightly. That's not encouraging. But not all fever cures were this steamy. Some patients were buried up to their necks in warm soil to draw out the illness. Others were laid on beds of hot stones wrapped in furs. And then there's the method of fever confusion, where loud noises or sudden dousing with cold water were used to surprise the sickness out of you, like medieval jump scares for germs. You overhear a debate nearby. One old man argues that fevers are signs of inner sin, not sickness. Burning shame, he insists, wagging a finger. The village priest nods solemnly. Another healer chimes in, or just spoiled fish. You appreciate the diversity of opinions. Outside, bells toll gently for midday prayer. The wind carries a whiff of chamomile and, somehow, charred turnips. You wonder if someone's trying the turnip on the belly method again. It was meant to distract the body from its internal turmoil by focusing it on the strange smell of roasted root vegetables. Results were inconclusive. Another patient stirs beside you. She's pale, damp, and breathing heavily, but she manages a weak smile. Her wrist is tied with a red ribbon soaked in cow urine and saffron, a charm to keep the flame from spreading. You glance down and realize someone's tied a similar ribbon around your ankle. Nice touch. You're offered a piece of candied horseradish. To break the chill, the healer says. The sharpness jolts your senses. It's like eating spiced fire. But, oddly, it works. You cough, your eyes water, and your skin prickles with goosebumps. A few minutes later, your fever begins to recede. Or maybe the sweat chamber is just finally getting to you. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these methods. Some ingredients, like horseradish and garlic, do have antimicrobial properties. Others, like frog paste or fire surprises, are more theatrical than therapeutic. But the underlying idea, helping the body purge illness through sweat and herbal balance, wasn't completely off the mark. As the session ends, a bucket of cool water is poured over your head. You gasp, drenched and blinking. A cloth is draped over you, infused with mint and lemon balm. Rest now, the healer says. You've done the hard work. Your humors are sighing with relief. You slump back onto the bench, half-cooked and weirdly comforted. Outside, the world carries on. Carts rattling, birds chirping, someone arguing about whether fevers come from demons or spoiled cheese. You close your eyes. You survived the sweat. And the frogs. When you open your eyes again, the heat is gone. The air is cool, dry, and heavy with incense. You're no longer in a treatment room, or even a home. You're in a chapel, or rather, something between a place of worship and a medieval health clinic. Rows of wooden benches face a simple altar adorned with flickering candles, and hanging behind it is a strange object, a shriveled sandal said to have belonged to Saint Guthlac, who once cured a man of gout by simply looking at his feet. This, you realize, is sacred medicine. For all the herbs and leeches, medieval people often turned to higher powers when sickness struck. The church was central to daily life and healing. Monasteries were the closest thing to hospitals, and monks were often more literate and better at record-keeping than any village doctor. But here, in the hush of relics and rituals, healing wasn't just about the body. It was about the soul, too. A woman kneels beside you, pressing a tiny carved figurine to her lips, a piece of bone, supposedly from the finger of Saint Apollonia, patron of toothaches. Nearby, another man rubs a square of cloth believed to be cut from Saint Martin's robe across his forehead. He does this with the solemn intensity of someone applying a prescription ointment. And in a way, he is. You're handed a small token, a ribbon tied around a shard of wood. "From the true cross," whispers a monk. Is it real? Probably not. But it doesn't seem to matter. The gesture is comfort enough. Historians still argue whether these relics worked through psychological placebo, social ritual, or simple coincidence. But there's no denying their power. Cathedrals filled with crutches from people who claimed to walk again, scrolls signed in trembling gratitude, and stained-glass windows depicting miraculous recoveries. You watch as a procession begins, slow, rhythmic, peaceful. Pilgrims file through the chapel, holding candles and muttering soft prayers. One carries a cloth doll filled with ashes and dried basil, representing a loved one who couldn't make the journey. Another sprinkles powdered bone dust over his head while reciting the same psalm over and over. These are acts of devotion, but also healing. Here, to pray is to hope. A choir begins to hum, low, sonorous tones echoing against the stone walls. You feel it in your ribs, like a massage from sound itself. Music, after all, was often prescribed for melancholy, and this feels like medicine. You move slowly toward a side chamber where a monk tends a table of holy cures. There are vials of blessed oil, wax tablets with saintly inscriptions, and, most curiously, a bowl of dried rose petals soaked in sanctified urine. For spiritual wounds, he says solemnly. You blink. Spiritual wounds? Despair. Restlessness. Night terrors. He stirs the bowl with a small silver spoon. One pinch under the tongue. Very mild. You take a polite step back. The monk nods kindly, as if understanding your hesitation. In another alcove, a patient lies beneath a canopy of candlelight, arms spread wide. He's being exorcised, not violently, but gently. The priest recites psalms while brushing his body with rosemary sprigs and holy water. Occasionally, he rings a small bell. It's hypnotic. The patient murmurs something about feeling lighter, then falls asleep. Whatever demons he carried seem to have dozed off too. You're shown a collection of saints' images, each tied to a specific ailment. Saint Roch for plague, Saint Blaise for throat troubles, Saint Dymphna for mental illness. Pilgrims would carry these images, sew them into clothing, or even bake them into bread. Yes, you heard that right. Bread with saintly pictures stamped on top. Swallowing faith, one bite at a time. One woman whispers that her son was cured of night sweats after placing a splinter of St. Edmund's staff beneath his pillow. Another swears that rubbing a coin once touched by a holy hermit rid her of the dark thoughts. You smile faintly. Whether it's placebo or providence, something clearly works for them. Outside the chapel, the world is still turning. Slow carts, children chasing chickens, someone calling for turnips. But in here, time has folded inward. It's just candles, echoes, and the soft rustle of robes. You feel quiet. A monk offers you a small vial of oil, scented with lavender, basil, and frankincense. Take this, he says, for peace. You tuck it into your blanket and nod. You might not believe in miracles, but you've seen what faith can do to pain. And as you return to your cot, the sandal of St. Guthlac still swinging gently in its place, you breathe in the scent of sanctified smoke and old stories. Maybe healing is part herbs, part hands, and part hope. It's the middle of the night, and you wake to a sound you'd rather not identify. A wet squish, followed by a soft plop. You open your eyes, turn slowly, and find yourself face to face with something you hoped was just a rumor. A small clay pot filled with unmistakably animal dung. Goose dung, to be precise. The healer pats your shoulder and says, "Don't worry, it's for your ulcer." You don't remember having an ulcer. But here it is, the sacred and surprisingly common realm of fecal medicine. Yes, medieval healers didn't just tolerate excrement. They celebrated it. To them, dung wasn't merely waste. It was warm, it was natural, and according to more than a few manuscripts, it had extraordinary healing potential. Goose droppings, for instance, were used in salves for ulcers and open sores. Freshly collected and mixed with vinegar or honey, they were applied directly to the skin. Soothes the heat, they'd say. You try not to picture the collection process. In another corner of the room, a woman is mixing fox feces with goat's milk to create a poultice for a swollen joint. The fox draws out evil spirits, she explains, as if that's the most obvious thing in the world. Some recipes required that the dung be collected under specific moons, or after the animal had eaten certain herbs. Medicine, after all, is nothing without precision. Historians still debate whether these treatments had some accidental anti-inflammatory properties. After all, the microbiome is powerful, or if medieval medicine was just very committed to using every available resource. You're offered a small tablet made from dried sheep dung and powdered rose petals. Good for stomach wind, the apothecary insists. Take with wine. You hesitate. He shrugs. Better than the fish oil enema. You take the tablet. The man next to you is applying a cow dung plaster to his forehead. He claims it reduces fevers if left overnight and covered with cabbage leaves. He looks oddly relaxed, as though it's not the first time he's slept with livestock-based skincare. You wonder, not for the first time, how someone discovered these things. Did someone accidentally fall face first into a manure pile and suddenly feel better? Was it trial and error, divine inspiration, or just the medieval willingness to experiment with anything? There's even a recipe involving virgin's dung. No, not a metaphor. In some rural regions, the feces of infants were believed to be especially pure and powerful, applied to burns, rashes, or even as a preventative measure against the plague. Untouched by sin, said one 14th-century healer. You scoot slightly farther from the baby in the corner. Even religious texts mention dung as sacred. The Book of Ezekiel has a famous and disturbing passage involving cooking over human waste, meant as a symbol of humility and obedience. Some particularly devout monks took this to heart, literally, rubbing feces on their bodies during fasts to purify themselves of pride. You're starting to understand why incense was so popular. Back in your cot, you're given a foot bath containing warm water, thyme, ash, and pigeon droppings. The smell is assertive, but your feet feel oddly soothed. Maybe it's the heat. Maybe it's the time. Maybe you're just giving up and letting the Middle Ages do its thing. You remember a story someone told earlier, about a nobleman cured of migraines after wearing a dried clump of ox dung in a pouch around his neck. It draws the pain down, they said. Gravity, but smellier. Outside, the night is quiet save for the distant howl of wolves and the occasional creak of a wooden cart. Inside, the dung continues its humble work, packed into wounds, stirred into drinks, dried into powders and tucked into pouches like medicinal treasure. There's a strange beauty to it all. These people weren't being disgusting for its own sake. They were being resourceful. In a world without penicillin, sterile gauze, or refrigeration, dung was just one more tool in the box. A smelly, squishy, deeply committed tool. And as you drift off, blanket tugged up to your chin, the smell oddly fading into the background, you hear someone whispering a healing charm over a pot of donkey manure. You smile faintly. If nothing else, you're getting the full medieval experience. You awaken to a curious sight. A group of apprentices huddled around a glowing stained-glass window, but not for prayer. Instead, they're holding up little flasks of urine, yours included, carefully comparing them to a chart of yellows, ambers, and mysterious cloudy hues. You've entered the alchemical corner of medieval medicine, where the humble act of peeing becomes a diagnostic ritual, and sometimes an art form. A senior physician arrives, robes billowing as if the laws of physics respect his education. He adjusts a pair of tiny spectacles, purely decorative, and gestures grandly toward the central table. Laid out in a perfect ring is the urine wheel, a marvel of medieval medical ingenuity. It's painted with radiant golds and sepias, each segment labeled with a Latin term and a matching bodily complaint. One apprentice reverently whispers, "This one here, spuma alba, indicates phlegm in the chest, or demonic visitation, depending on the season." You try not to chuckle, but a little escapes. No one seems offended. After all, this is serious work. A doctor in 1380 could reportedly diagnose over 60 conditions based solely on urine, its color, smell, clarity, taste, and even how it bubbled when shaken. Yes, bubbled. The physician picks up your flask, gently tilts it, and hums. "Sediment settling slowly," he murmurs. "Likely a melancholy imbalance, possibly aggravated by damp air or excessive contemplation." He sniffs, briefly, mercifully, and dips in a tiny piece of cloth. No bitterness. That's good. You glance at the urine wheel again. One segment suggests urina flammea, fiery urine, is a sign of excessive choler, possibly caused by eating too many spicy root vegetables, or spending time near angry goats. Historians still argue whether these elaborate charts were based on real symptom clusters, or were just a combination of pattern matching and wildly imaginative logic. Interestingly, some of the associations weren't entirely off. Cloudy urine can indicate infection. Bright yellow can mean dehydration. Dark brown might reflect liver trouble. But where modern science stops at chemistry, medieval doctors kept going, right into metaphysics. You're handed a second flask, this time not your own. Compare, says the apprentice cheerfully. You hesitate. The liquid is darker, swirling with strange streaks. This was from a man who had visions of Saint Ursula during fever, he adds. You hold it up to the light and nod solemnly. Ah, yes. Divine undertones. They appreciate your enthusiasm. Across the hall, a child is being taught how to prepare the flask correctly. Morning collection, says the instructor. Midstream, never first drop. There's a ritual to it, a rhythm. The flask must be warmed by hand, shaken exactly 3 times, then held to natural light, never candlelight, which could distort the hue. You wonder if they ever got competitive about this. Mine's a perfect honey gold with balanced froth. Oh yeah, mine once predicted a lunar eclipse. In a corner, a dusty manuscript sits open. It contains dozens of illustrations of pea flasks, some elegant, some oddly bubbly. Marginalia includes scribbled notes like strong onion scent equals untrustworthy character, and pale as moon equals likely to weep without cause. You raise an eyebrow. That one might be personal. A novice records your results in a scroll titled Liber de Urines. Your entry is somewhere between modestly hopeful and slightly whimsical. You're given a diagnosis of gentle liver wind, which sounds more like a Renaissance lute piece than a medical issue. Still, you're prescribed a remedy, a broth of boiled dandelion root, crushed chestnuts, and 3 drops of goat urine distilled at dawn. To cleanse the yellow pathways, explains the doctor. You nod slowly, unsure if he means your liver, your kidneys, or something more poetic. Before you leave, you're invited to try one last analysis. Taste. A small sip, the apprentice urges. Just for scholarship. You politely decline. Most do, he says with a grin. Outside, a breeze rustles the chapel banners. The urine flasks are sealed and placed in a wooden cabinet beside others, labeled by date and diagnosis. A small bell chimes for the next patient. You leave with a strange sense of clarity. There's something oddly comforting about how deeply they cared, how hard they tried to read the body's messages, even if those messages were floating in a golden bottle. Back in your cot, you sip the prescribed dandelion broth, earthy and slightly sour. You think about the strange poetry of it all, how people once believed the soul spoke through fluids, how yellow could mean imbalance, or insight, or divine communication. You close your eyes. You feel lighter. Maybe that's just the broth. You awaken to moonlight. Cold silver spills across the stone floor like melted frost, and something in the air feels unsteady. Not evil exactly, just strange. You hear muttering nearby, soft and rhythmic, like a prayer or a spell. You sit up slowly. Welcome to the shadowed corridors of medieval psychiatry, where madness met moonlight, and healing meant holy water, herbs, or chains. Across the room, a man is pacing in circles, eyes glazed, hands fluttering like moths. A healer trails him calmly, murmuring a chant under her breath. The moon, she tells you, has pulled at his mind again. Yes, the moon. Medieval thinkers believed mental disturbances were deeply tied to lunar cycles. In fact, the word lunatic comes from luna, Latin for moon. A full moon could spark visions, hysteria, melancholy, or worse. The remedy? That depended entirely on who you asked. Some believed madness came from within, the result of hot humors rising to the brain. Others blamed spirits, demonic possession, or even curses laid by jealous neighbors. One especially persistent theory was that bad thoughts were a kind of miasma that leaked into the mind through the nose while you slept. You look around and notice the strange measures in place: dried herbs tied above doors, tiny mirrors hung over the beds, bowls of ash tucked beneath pillows to trap night vapors. A man lies on his cot, wrists loosely tied with silken cords. Just so he doesn't fly away, a nun explains. Not all patients are agitated. One woman sits perfectly still, wrapped in a blue shawl, staring out a window with quiet intensity. She's been diagnosed with visionary melancholy, a mix of spiritual insight and depressive episodes. Her treatment? Reading the Book of Psalms backwards and drinking valerian root boiled in goat milk. You're handed your own dose of something earthy and bitter. For rest, the healer says. It helps quiet the mind's wandering. It tastes like boiled bark and regret. Nearby, a priest is conducting a soft-spoken ritual over a man who hasn't spoken in 3 days. No screaming, no flailing, just silence. The diagnosis: soul withdrawal. The cure: holy water sprinkled with hyssop, and a song sung 3 times at sunrise. Historians still debate whether these rituals were forms of control, genuine belief, or a strange kind of prototherapy. But there's no denying the effort to soothe, to protect, even to understand. The healer leads you into a small chamber, a cooling room. Its walls are lined with clay, and a soft breeze flows in through slatted shutters. Here, those suffering from burning thoughts are given cold compresses of lavender and ash, or gently doused in water infused with poppy and vinegar. You lie back on a cool slab, the scent of mint rising in waves. One monk speaks of gut winds, an ancient theory that emotions were stirred by trapped gases inside the intestines. Feelings of dread, despair, even rage, were often traced to a bloated stomach. His remedy? A gentle enema of chamomile tea and warm oil. You politely decline, claiming your humors are already balanced. Elsewhere, a man swears that burying his feet in wet clay every morning cured him of visions. Another claims he was healed by sleeping on a grave, preferably one freshly dug. The logic: the earth pulls away madness. It listens, he says, with a grin that's too wide to be comforting. Back in the ward, a group of patients sings together, soft lullabies and fragments of hymns. Music therapy, medieval style. One woman taps a rhythm on a hollow bowl, the sound echoing like a heartbeat. Another recites lines from Virgil while braiding a dried garland of rosemary and rue. You realize something surprising. They aren't being mocked. They're being held, seen, and, in a way, cared for. The line between madness and spiritual insight was thin, and sometimes revered. Some holy fools were believed to be touched by God, their madness a kind of divine message. Others, tragically, were shut away in stone cells, never to emerge again. You hear a man begin laughing, softly, then wildly. A healer moves to his side, hands him a pouch of dried hops, and begins whispering a chant in Old French. He calms. You exhale. Back in your cot, you're handed a sprig of rosemary to tuck beneath your pillow. It keeps away the dreaming fog, the healer says. You nod, tucking it beneath your head. Outside, the moon is still full, hovering like a pale eye. But you feel grounded now, anchored by song, scent, and the curious care of people trying their best in a world with no neurology textbooks, no therapists, no MRI scans. Just plants, prayers, and persistent compassion. You close your eyes. No chains. No screams. Just the soft hush of old voices humming gently in the dark. The scent of vinegar hits you before you open your eyes. It's sharp, tangy, and chased by the familiar warmth of rosemary and old wood smoke. You're in a cottage now, smaller, simpler, and more fragrant than any monk's infirmary or nobleman's hall. This is the home of a village healer, a cunning woman, perhaps even a witch by some whispered standards. But here she's simply called Granny Alice, and her shelves are lined with jars, herbs, bones, and bottles that shimmer with mysterious liquids, including one that looks suspiciously like fermented cow urine. "Don't wrinkle your nose," she scolds gently, placing a steaming bowl of vinegar and garlic under your cot. "It clears the sick air." You nod obediently, the way you would if your grandmother had just threatened to cure your cough with pig's bladder tea. Granny Alice isn't alone in her craft. Across medieval Europe, hundreds, if not thousands, of women like her served as the front-line physicians of the poor. While the university-trained male doctors scribbled Latin diagnoses in cities, village healers worked with what they had: roots, ash, animal parts, and deep memory passed through generations. She pulls up a stool and begins inspecting your fingernails, your eyes, the tip of your tongue. "You've got too much heat in the gut," she murmurs. "Been thinking too much, haven't you?" You nod. "And bad dreams, yes?" You nod again. She smiles. "Easy fix. Dandelion syrup, moss powder, and a touch of boiled horse's milk. You weren't expecting that last one." She works quickly, grinding dried nettle with a mortar shaped from a lamb's skull, stirring with a spoon that may have once been part of a ladle, or a shoehorn. "You'll want to sip this at moonrise," she says. "But if you throw it up, don't worry. That's part of the cure." Historians still argue whether village healers were more effective than licensed doctors. Some say they saved more lives. Others point out the guesswork. But one thing is clear: they were trusted. People lined up for their powders, poultices, prayers, and quiet wisdom. And when all else failed, they listened. Outside, you hear soft chanting, women reciting protective verses while hanging bundles of herbs above doorways. Rue for warding off evil. Yarrow for blood. Lavender for sleep. One girl laughs as she rubs crushed wormwood on her wrists. "Keeps the spirits from getting too close," she says. Back inside, Granny Alice pulls out a little leather pouch. Inside is what she calls a spirit knot, a mix of hair, thread, fennel seeds, and something that might be dried frog skin. "Tie this near your bed," she instructs. "If you dream of wolves, burn it in the morning." You hesitate. She adds with a wink, "but only if the wolves are talking." Some remedies, however, feel strangely familiar. A honeyed root infusion to ease digestion. A compress of comfrey for a bruised shoulder. Apple cider mixed with clay to draw out infections. These sound like something your own grandmother might have tried. It's humbling, really, to realize that across centuries people reached for the same earthbound tools. She hands you a paste wrapped in linen. "For the spot on your back," she says. "Goose fat, ash, dried fig, and cow urine aged 3 days." You raise an eyebrow. "Not 4. She grins. "4's just filthy." Outside the door, a traveller hobbles in, his foot swollen and red. She doesn't flinch. "You've stepped where something old lives," she says. "Mud spirits don't like loud boots." She bathes his foot in a mixture of warm nettle and pickled onions, then wraps it with a cloth printed with protective runes. He bows, thanks her, and hobbles off with what looks like genuine relief. Not far from the hearth, A young woman arrives with a baby wrapped tightly to her chest. The infant's feverish. Granny Alice listens, nods, then instructs her to sit near the fireplace while she prepares a cradle infusion, steamed wine, dried pears, and powdered dung beetle shell. To calm the fever down, she explains. You sit quietly, watching the room breathe with its own rhythm, herbs simmering, jars clinking, voices low and steady. In the city, doctors diagnose with flasks and charts. Here, healing is part conversation, part intuition, part kitchen magic. And as night creeps deeper, you lie back on a straw mattress covered in herbs and crinkled linen. Granny Alice tucks the spirit knot beneath your pillow, lights a small taper, and whispers, "Let the heat leave through your toes." You close your eyes. You've never been more certain that someone truly cares. It's near dawn now. The sky outside is the color of cold ashes, and you find yourself in an unfamiliar corner of the infirmary. The walls are covered not with crucifixes or herbs, but with diagrams, stars, moons, and winding constellations inked in deep brown. In front of you stands a man draped in midnight blue robes, his fingers stained with soot and wax. He doesn't introduce himself as a doctor. He calls himself an astrologist, a medical astrologer, and tonight he's going to diagnose your liver using the moon. You blink. He nods solemnly. The liver is ruled by Jupiter. We begin there. You've stumbled into the third pillar of medieval medicine, astrology. To treat the body, one had to understand the stars. Every organ, illness, and mood was tied to a celestial body. The heart belonged to the sun, the brain to the moon. Melancholy came from Saturn, coughs from Mars, and if you fell ill during the wrong planetary alignment, well, you'd better just rest and hope for a favorable eclipse. The astrologer traces your birth chart using a brass compass, then mutters something about a retrograde. That explains the dreams, he says, and the gut wind. You nod, as if this makes perfect sense. He shows you a parchment scroll, filled with illustrations of human figures overlaid with zodiac symbols. This, he says, pointing to the foot, is Pisces. Best not to apply poultices there while Venus is in decline. You weren't planning to, but good to know. Historians still argue how much stock medieval people actually put in medical astrology. Some physicians dismissed it as superstition, while others insisted it was essential to practice. In fact, many university medical degrees required passing a basic astrology exam. Timing a treatment was seen as just as important as the treatment itself. The astrologer finishes his chart and prescribes a blend of herbs to be taken only during a waxing moon, before sunrise, and not on Wednesdays. Mercury interferes, he warns. You're not the only patient tonight. A young man is having his fingernails trimmed according to lunar phases. Prevents madness, his sister explains. An older woman clutches a vial of oil meant to calm the Mars inside her. Another patient refuses to drink a fever tonic until Saturn leaves Scorpio. The nurse rolls her eyes but waits patiently. Nearby, someone is reading aloud from a tome titled The Zodiacal Body. It's filled with advice like, do not bloodlet on Aries days, and never treat a spleen beneath a waning crescent. You wonder how many patients timed their vomiting to match the stars. But it wasn't all abstract. There were also humours to consider, those infamous bodily fluids, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness, they believed, was a matter of imbalance. Too much black bile, you'd be melancholy. Too much yellow bile, angry and feverish. Everything from your mood to your skin tone was explained through these 4 elemental rivers. The astrologer believes your current condition is a mix of lunar interference and excessive choler. He prescribes a cooling regimen, barley broth, cucumber, and goat milk kept overnight under starlight. The milk absorbs celestial calm, he says. Back in your cot, a nurse checks your pulse, not just for speed, but rhythm. Jerky pulse under a full moon, she murmurs. Might be liver rage. She makes a note with a quill, her script looping like vines. You're offered a tea made with chicory, violets, and powdered pearl. For tempering the humours, the healer explains. It tastes faintly like perfume, but you sip politely. In the corner, two monks debate whether Saturn or Mars governs toothaches. One argues based on a patient's sudden pain during a comet sighting. The other insists it was simply bad fish. A third monk suggests both may be right, depending on the humoral composition of the fish. You lie back again, head spinning, not from fever, but from the sheer complexity of it all. The stars, the seasons, the fluids inside you, everything is connected. You are not just a body, but a constellation in miniature, a cosmos with limbs. Outside, the sky begins to lighten. Birds stir in the trees, and a rooster calls out with deeply inconvenient confidence. The astrologer folds your chart with great care and hands you a polished stone. Place this on your chest while sleeping, he says. It draws down moonlight. You nod. You don't entirely believe it. But maybe belief isn't required. You drift off once more, the stone warming slightly against your skin, your body a quiet planet spinning beneath the slow, deliberate choreography of the stars. You wake to the sound of pages turning, not crisp and clean like modern books, but soft and worn, parchment that's been thumbed, poured, and splattered over decades. You're lying on a cot near a small scriptorium, the workshop of a monastic medical scholar. The air smells of ink, tallow, and mildew. Candles sputter nearby, their wax pooling on an old oak desk where a monk, thin, intent, and slightly hunched, labors over a manuscript. He doesn't look up as you stir. Almost done transcribing the dung section, he says casually. You blink. The what? The dung section. Of Compendium Physicae. Fascinating stuff. Deer for the lungs. Pig for the spleen. Bat for melancholy. He dips his quill in a jar and continues writing. You sit up slowly. All around you, books line the walls, hand-bound volumes filled with medical recipes, diagrams, and marginalia. Some pages are smudged with what looks like soot. Others, let's just say you wouldn't want to lick your finger to turn the page. This is the forgotten heart of medieval medicine, the manuscript. Before printing presses, before textbooks, medicine travelled in ink, copied carefully by scribes who didn't always understand what they were writing. Errors crept in. So did imagination. But the results were extraordinary. You glance at an open page nearby. It shows a diagram of the human body labeled not in anatomical terms, but by treatment zones. There's a little drawing of a man with words like apply owl dung here and rub with eel fat after sunset scrawled beside him. Next to that, a list of illnesses and their appropriate excretions. It reads like a shopping list for the world's worst apothecary. One recipe catches your eye. For the purging of internal demons *. Mix bear dung, fresh, with goose feather ash. Add to vinegar and boil until thick. Apply as poultice under left armpit during Lent. Historians still argue whether some of these entries were ever used, or if they were just recorded out of caution, curiosity, or even jest. Margins often included little doodles, monks poking leeches, animals vomiting, or saints frowning at chamber pots. You spot a tiny sketch of a very annoyed-looking goat next to a recipe involving fermented goat urine and lavender. You're handed a page to hold down as the monk rewrites it. The header reads, "Concerning tumours of the neck." The recipe calls for boiled cabbage, dog saliva, and earth gathered from a freshly dug grave. The combination, it promises, will charm away swelling with the breath of the underworld. You don't know what to do with that information. Other manuals are even more eccentric. One page is a feces color chart, not unlike the urine wheel, but for stool. Pale gray, sad spleen, dark green, troubled thoughts, black. The devil in your bowels. You flip the page quickly. Another book contains advice on animal patients. How to treat a melancholic cow. What herbs help geese pass wind. There's even a section on reluctant donkeys. You read it twice, just to be sure. The monk smiles at your fascination. The world is strange, he says, but the body, stranger still. He hands you a completed scroll, bound with twine. It contains recipes exclusively involving bird droppings. Very valuable in spring, he notes. You wonder how much of this was ever tested. But then again, what does tested mean in a world where observation, belief, and ritual are inseparable? Maybe they tried it all. Some things helped, others hurt, and some just made good stories. In the corner, a novice is illustrating a fresh manuscript with brilliant red ink. He's drawing Saint Roch with a poultice of pigeon droppings on his thigh. Art, he says solemnly, for clarity. The pages are sprinkled with shell gold, real flecks of metal that shimmer in the candlelight. The sickness may be grim, but the books are beautiful. You sit quietly, surrounded by knowledge that's equal parts wonder and absurdity. These weren't dusty collections of nonsense. They were living records of hope. Every odd recipe, every scribbled correction, every drawing of a grumpy dog or saint with stomach issues, they were all part of a shared attempt to understand suffering. You're offered a warm cup of something, gooseberry tea steeped with thyme and a trace of old parchment. For memory, says the monk. You sip, and as you lie back again, the scratching of quills and the whisper of turning pages fill the room like a soft, steady heartbeat. A record of humanity's long, strange dance with illness, one page at a time. The morning light is soft now, diffused through thin clouds, filtered by linen curtains that flutter with the gentlest breeze. You're back in a quiet cottage, bundled in layers of wool and linen, and the air smells like thyme and beeswax. A cup of warm barley water rests in your hand, steeped with mint and a single slice of dried apple. No needles, no frogs, no flasks of gold-tinted diagnosis today. Just warmth, stillness. You're nearly better. Not cured, of course. Healing, in the medieval world, was rarely absolute. But you've survived leeches and goat poultices, bloodletting and bubbling urine, holy chants and dung salves. You've seen medicine's best attempts, its worst guesses, and its curious, unwavering hope. And somehow, through it all, you're still here. A healer stops by to check your pulse, not your heartbeat, but your temperament. She declares your humor's settling, which you take as a good sign. No vinegar compresses, no rituals under the moon. Just a smile and a bundle of dried sage for the road. In the hearth, a small pot simmers with rosemary, onion, and goat's milk. For general vitality, someone says. A child is drinking his portion quietly while watching a beetle crawl along the stone floor. An old man sleeps nearby, snoring softly, a poppy-stuffed pillow cradling his head. Outside, the garden is blooming. Lavender, tansy, marigold. Some for beauty, most for healing. A chicken pecks near a bucket of water filled with soaked comfrey roots. You watch the scene, comforted by its smallness, its steadiness. Granny Alice stops by, offering a slice of bread with honey and a thin smear of lard. Eat. You'll need strength. She pats your hand, nods once, and vanishes back to her garden. You breathe in slowly. There is a quiet rhythm to recovery here. It's not about medicine as we know it, not pills or procedures, but about pacing, time, trust, warmth, rest, and a community of people who believed that even the most absurd treatment might hold a sliver of comfort. Historians today laugh at medieval cures, at the urine wheels and roasted mouse compresses, the cow dung salves and frog-laced broths. But what they sometimes forget is that these weren't the work of fools. They were the efforts of desperate, caring hands trying to pull health from a world that gave no guarantees. You think of the leech jars, the chants, the poultices made from ash and oil and prayer. You think of the songs, the pages filled with careful ink, the monk's steady hand as he drew a saint beside a bucket of, well, let's just say herbal surprise. And you realize something quietly profound. It wasn't about curing so much as caring. The very act of trying, of tending, of believing, was a balm in itself. You stretch beneath your blanket, the soft weight of the night still clinging to your limbs. The light from the window is golden now, warm and slow. Someone places a cup of herb tea beside you. Not a cure, but comfort. You sip, eyes half closed. Somewhere, a bell tolls. Not an alarm. A reminder. You're alive. And you're allowed to rest. So now, as your body settles deeper into stillness, let your breath soften. Let your limbs grow heavy. Feel the weight of the blanket, the hush in the room, the faint rustle of fabric as you shift slightly into comfort. You've walked through centuries tonight, past foul-smelling tonics, absurd rituals, beautiful failures, and unexpected wisdom. You've been bled and blessed, sniffed and soothed. And yet, with each strange remedy and whispered charm, you were never alone. Someone was always trying to help. The stories of medieval medicine aren't just curiosities from the past. They're quiet echoes of what we all still want today. Care, attention, healing, and maybe, if we're lucky, a little peace. So now let the journey fade. The voices grow quieter. The flicker of torchlight dims. The pages of dusty manuscripts close softly, their words sleeping beside you. The moon, that ever-watchful eye of old medicine, slips behind a cloud. Your body has done enough. Your mind has wandered far. Let it rest now. Let the bed hold you, gently and without demand. Let the air move softly through the room like a lullaby no one ever quite learned to finish. Let your breath be the only rhythm that matters. You are safe. You are warm. You are healing, slowly, wonderfully, as people have always done, long before we had names for it. Sleep now. Tomorrow can wait.